Hey, it's Patricia Murphy. It's Wednesday, and this is Seattle Now. Every presidential election ends with the same ritual. The loser concedes the race, and the government starts a peaceful transition of power. But this time around, that's not the way it's going down. In a minute, UW historian Margaret OMara will put President Trump's refusal to concede into context and tell us what's at stake when a peaceful transition of power is thrown into question. But first, let's get you caught up. State health officials warn it's too risky to gather for Thanksgiving this year. COVID-19 numbers are hitting record highs. The rate in King County is now 178 infections per 100,000 people. Officials want to see that number drop to 25. And time is running out to reverse course and flatten the curve. Governor Inslee isn't putting out any new restrictions for now, but just to the south, Oregon's Governor Kate Brown has expanded a 2-week pause on social activities, including limits on restaurants, and visits to long-term care facilities are not allowed. Remember that nest of Asian giant hornets? They were removed in the nick of time. The Washington State Department of Agriculture said it found 200 queens in the nest that had just hatched or were about to. They could have started nests of their own and endangered more of Washington's honeybees, but scientists warn we are not out of the woods yet. They'll continue to search for the hornets in the hopes of completely exterminating them. And today is Veterans Day, a day to thank members of the armed forces for their service. COVID has canceled many in-person services and events. Lots of places are figuring out how to celebrate safely, though. Auburn has created an online event in place of its huge parade, and the city of Mill Creek is hosting a reverse parade where you drive by the floats. It's been 4 days since Joe Biden was declared the winner of the presidential election, but President Trump has yet to concede. Instead, he's made claims of election fraud without proof and is even having the Department of Justice launch an investigation into election results. This response might not be surprising given Trump's rhetoric over the past few months, but it is pretty much unprecedented in modern American history. Margaret OMara is here to help us make sense of the situation. She's a professor of history at the University of Washington. Hi, Margaret.
Hi, how are you?
Okay, for 2020, as we say. I have seen the words over and over again, contested election. It's being thrown around a lot this week, as well as references to the 2000 election. What does that term mean? And is that what the Trump administration is really doing right now?
Well, the Trump administration is contesting, but this is not a contested election in the way that previous ones in American history have been, because in those cases, it was a very, very narrow margin of victory, and there was true disputes over whether the voters' intent was being reflected in the vote counts. Take, for example, 2000. That all boiled down to one state, Florida, and really one county in Florida, Palm Beach County, which had the infamous paper ballots that were
hanging chads.
Hanging chads, yes. Those of a certain age in the listening audience will remember vividly the hanging chads. And so there was a recount, and really what ended the recount was the Supreme Court saying, you guys need to end the recount because we need to validate the votes. And Al Gore conceded. And the same thing goes, the other times we've had contested elections that have dragged on for days, weeks, months after Election Day have been in the 19th century, when the electoral vote and the popular vote don't gel with one another, which of course is what happened in 2000 and again in 2016. Now 2020 is different. We have Joe Biden winning the popular vote and the electoral vote, and the Trump campaign and many Republicans saying this is not legitimate and casting doubt on what has been a free and fair election.
Let's talk for a minute about the importance of a concession speech. Is it just about being polite, or is there real-world consequences to conceding this election?
Yeah, there has always been a concession speech in every election, no matter how narrow, including people who were not necessarily really great losers. Even Richard Nixon in 1960, who very narrowly lost. So it is a really important ritual, but it's more than just a ritual. It actually has an administrative purpose. Once the person has conceded an election and there's acknowledgement of that there is a president-elect, then that president-elect can tap into federal funds that support their transition team and also work with the existing administration to make the transition smooth, to make it so that the government doesn't go sideways on January 20th, 21st when the change of power happens. So it's really in the interest of the American public, particularly right now. Think of all the things that are going to be on Joe Biden's plate in January.
Right. We're in the middle of a pandemic, and he is in the process of trying to name a team to address the pandemic. And because of the situation we're dealing with the current administration, a lot of that work is being held up. And, at this point, the Republican Party's response is intriguing as well. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo was asked about working with the Biden administration on the transition, and he said there will be a smooth transition to a second Trump administration. Those words sound chilling in context right now, considering what we're dealing with. Most Republican elected officials right now are either staying silent or supporting the president, including here in Washington. So what role do these politicians and this party have to play in this moment in history?
Well, I think it's really distressing. I really hope that Mike Pompeo was attempting to make a bad joke. But the Secretary of State, even if he was, he shouldn't be joking like that. And you hear, election officials, both Republican and Democrat in these states saying, everything's on the up and up, guys. And so the silence becomes an endorsement. Into that vacuum comes the fever swamps of conspiracy. You have on social media all of this, this ability for these conspiracy theories that have been gestating for quite some time to now reach altitude and velocity. And it's worrisome if Republican elected officials who are staying silent now, just to give President Trump some time to process this loss and to figure out a way to concede gracefully with his ego mostly intact, it gives this space for people's hearts and minds to go in all sorts of directions. And that's dangerous for our democracy.
And perception is such an important part of this election at this point. Mm-hmm. The rhetoric undermining the integrity of the election started a long time ago from the Trump administration. We never even got a chance to vote before they were talking about how the vote was not going to be legitimate. Mm-hmm. And Trump has always been good at getting attention. He's a master showman. If the chances are truly slim that he can remain in office, then what is the point of this? What does he gain with this strategy?
Well, we're still talking about him, aren't we? Yeah, I think attention, the attention suck is part of it. Yeah. He's been very, very good at, occupying the brains, both of people who love him and people who do not. This is a very effective PR strategy. You keep on saying something again and again and again, and people are like, well, maybe there's some truth in that. And that is what's going on right now. And so we need to be really disciplined about the information that we're taking in and understand where reality ends and falsity begins.
That's a great point. You are not a law professor, no. But it seems like, legally speaking, Trump's attempts to stay in power will not work.
Yes. Legally speaking, there's certain standards that have to be met. There has to be proof of fraud. And the memo that Attorney General Bill Barr put out on Monday night, it was very carefully worded, saying if there's legitimate evidence of fraud, then you can look into it, making it clear that there has to be some there. And so far, evidence has not surfaced.
Yeah. Margaret, can history teach us anything about how we can move forward from this moment?
Well, I think it can. History, if we look back, we see many moments of crisis, and we also see moments when it could have gone in a very different direction, and we kind of pulled out of the spin. I've been thinking a lot this year about the early 1930s, another time of global economic crisis. The 1932 election was a referendum on Herbert Hoover, the president who presided over the first 3 years of the Great Depression. And he lost resoundingly to Franklin Roosevelt. I think leadership makes a big difference. What changes the course of history? It's both grassroots activism, it's marching in the streets, it's mobilizing, it's voting. But it's also that, that activism can elect new leadership, and that leadership, both the moral authority of a president through, rhetorical, bringing people together, being very honest about the challenges that are faced. The only thing we have to fear is fear itself, says for Roosevelt in his inaugural address in 1933. And also backing that up with policy action that is broad-based and gives people something else to believe in and hope for. The New Deal was imperfect, but it delivered material benefits to a huge swath of the American population and made people feel like the people in Washington are looking out for me. Roosevelt was not universally beloved. He had his enemies. No president has been universally beloved. But he was extraordinarily good at bringing the country together. And I think that's going to be Joe Biden's challenge. And it is possible. It is possible. This energy that's driving us apart can also be used to bring us together in a constructive way. And I think we have to have hope that we can do that and believe in that end and not let all of the noise around us distract us collectively from that goal of making democracy better and stronger and a union more perfect.
Margaret OMara is a professor of history at the University of Washington. Thank you. Great to talk to you. Thanks for listening to Seattle Now. The show is produced by Clare McGrane, Sophie Reed, Matt Martin, Caroline Chamberlain Gomez, and Jason Pagano. Matt Jorgensen does our music. I'm Patricia Murphy. See you tomorrow.
Now you can hear the KUOW news stories you want whenever you want with the KUOW Newsroom podcast.
Washington State's plan to distribute any potential COVID-19 vaccine.
Stay up to date with easy access to trusted in-depth reporting from our award-winning journalists.
Patient rolls up and rolls down his window. After the patient checks in, Nurse Teresa
Pick, skip, or save the stories you care about on demand.
Big change at the top of Bellevue-based T-Mobile.
Visit KUOW.org or search KUOW Newsroom on your podcasting app.